I'll tell you what, there's nothing worse than being charged by a bear. I mean, bears, there's something about them. They're so big and so vicious. And it's amazing how their adrenaline, when they charge you, is so high that regardless of how many times you shoot them, they keep coming. It's amazing. I mean, they don't die unless you really put a lot of lead into their head. I hate to say it, but when they charge, it's either you or him. And I left off on this Alaskan adventure story of going up the Tahkin River with my dog Tahkin. And we found the cabin that we're looking for. I opened the door and a bear ran out the window, jumped out the window. And I stopped right there because I want to tell you about this bear. And I wrote about it in my book. And of course, when you write, you can write with more detail than when you speak. And so if you want to check out I think it's the first book I've written, Memoirs of an Arctic Traveler. I talked about the bear charging. And since that time, I've been charged by half a dozen other bears. It seems like, you know, it happens, especially when you're living out in the wilderness as much as I have. But let me tell you about this guy. It was uh it was an evening when I when he came in and stole some food, and I went out there, of course. Um, Probably shouldn't have, but I was trying to, you know, preserve my rations, which was very little at the time because he had eaten quite a bit. And so I went after him under the moonlight, and we kind of met face to face, and I shot him, and that got him in a really bad mood. And he went after me like unbelievable, like nothing phased him, like not even a mosquito hurt him. I mean, the bullet was maybe phased him as much of a mosquito would phase a person. It, probably just itched him. He come after me, wild-eyed, growling, thrashing, 600 pounds of just angry flesh, and he was out to kill, and he nothing was going to stop him. And so, I have my Enfield. It holds 10 rounds. It's amazing that old Enfield World War II rifle like that. Um, it's not the most powerful rifle, not the most powerful round, but I mean, it seemed like it would kill a bear at point blank range, but it didn't. And he come after me. And the funny thing is about this bear, though. Usually, bears when they come after you, they're looking into your eyes, and you're looking into their eyes, and when they leap towards you, they're basically are trying to jump on top of you, like on top of your head, or I mean, just trying to get an advantage of it, get on top of you. Just like when they're killing a caribou, you can watch them. They jump right on top of them. Basically, their weight would knock them down. They can kill them. But this bear was different, which I'm glad he was. He was going after my legs, and I was running backwards as fast as I could. It was dark out, but I had the moonlight. And luckily, the southeast Alaska is just thick, thick brush and a lot of alders. Some of the alders only 2 or 3 inches around. And I was running backwards through all this thick brush and trying to get another round in my rifle. And he was just coming at me, and he was going after my legs. And rather than getting my legs, he would get these alders, and he'd just chomp them in two, just like nothing. holy smokes. And I was running backwards and pumping rounds into him, shooting him on, and of course my dog was there, Tahkin, and luckily, poor old boy, luckily, he didn't know what was going on, but dogs have a natural instinct to be afraid of bears. It's the strangest thing you ever did see, but it's natural instinct. And he was yiping, growling, carrying on. I thought he was trying to nip the bear in the butt, and which lucky he did because he caught the attention of the bear and the bear slowed down to look at him, and that gave me a chance to finally put that bear down. But it was a it was an interesting experience to say the least. Um, so it was a good bear. The bear had been living off of blueberries. A lot of those mountain bears in the mountains, they live off of blueberries. So their meat's good meat. And I skinned them out, put up the meat, and dried a lot of the meat. But the best part of that bear, I'll tell you what, was the fat. I mean, this guy was fat. He had probably 5 or 6 inches of fat on his body, or on his hips, on his rump, I guess you want to call it. And I took that fat and I put it in big pots. I put it in the oven. Now, the oven I had in the cabin, it was a wood stove oven. So you put wood on top and it heated the oven and it also heated the burners. And I rendered that fat down. I had gallons and gallons of just tallow, I guess you might want to call it. It's like butter. Delicious. They taught me how to make that in Canada. I lived with the natives here. Just delicious. And, nowadays, tallow's a delicacy. Um, but anyhow, so that's what I did with the bear. So it wasn't total waste. Um, but this, not the first bear attack. And many times I've been charged by bears in midwinter. And these bears are starving. They're dying. And it's just a matter of time before the wolves kill them. But usually when they see you, they come after you. I mean, there's nothing stopping them except you have to shoot them. And I'll tell you what, trying to shoot a bear in 40 and 50 below weather, temperatures, and it's tough, especially when your rifle doesn't fire. I'll tell you that story later on. But right now, I'm going to take you up the Tahkin River with my dog Tahkin to a little cabin on the side of the river in the thick Sitka forest. Trees 100 feet tall, just a beautiful forest. Um, it's just amazing country, high mountains. I don't know if you've ever seen the Southeast Alaska, but holy smokes, it's the most beautiful country there is. But it snows a lot. And Tahkin River is, I think Tahkin means deep, might mean snowy river in Tlingit language, Southeast Indians. And it snowed and snowed and snowed. But I spent 7 months up there, so I could sit there and talk to you for months about all the stories. But I'm going to kind of cut through some of the stuff and get right down to some of the interesting stories I had. We, even though I had that cabin, I'm not much for sitting around in a cabin. Probably some of you know that. So I ventured out a lot, and I would pack, my pack enough to last me 3 or 4 weeks away from the cabin. And I would put a little pack on Tahkin, the dog, or we pulled a sled, a toboggan, until as far as we could pull it. But the snow was so deep, it was almost easier just to wear packs. So we traveled upriver, and it was cold. It was really cold. Uh, it was probably December, I think, at that time, and the snow was 4 or 5 feet deep, and we plugged along for a few weeks and really got to see some beautiful country. Went up to the glaciers, Circuit Glacier, I think we went to, and just amazing. A lot of goats in that country. I'll tell you what, there were billy goats on every cliff. They're good eating. So I didn't have to worry too much about food. I just lived off the land. Um, it was quite an adventure. One of the best things about traveling like that, traveling light, and with their, you know, it doesn't blow much there. The wind doesn't blow much in the forest like that. So you could camp without a tent, regardless of the temperature. And what I did in order to stay warm at night, I would start a fire, usually about 6, 7, or 8 feet long, real long logs, and I'd lay them on the ground relatively close to a big Sitka spruce. And so we'd have Tahkin and I would sit around the fire in the evening and cook goat meat or bear meat, whatever we had. Um, and then when it come time to settle in for the night, I would just move all those hot coals in the fire. I'd put the fire out, move all the hot coals aside, and I would make sure that there was no hot coals in this long trench that I had, basically where the fire was. And then I would lay down a few spruce boughs. And I'd put my canvas on that, my sleeping bag on the canvas, and put the canvas over my sleeping bag so it kind of rolled up like a sandwich. And it was so warm. It was like sleeping on a warm bed all night. It would be, well below zero. And I was so comfortable just laying there watching looking at the stars, hearing the sounds. Oh my gosh, there's so much wildlife in the southeast Alaska. It's amazing. You can hardly sleep at night. You hear so many things. You got the wolves running around, wolverines, pine marten making noises in the trees, otters. It's just amazing, amazing country. And that's how we spent, 7 months just traveling around. And of course, I was trapping too, so I could make some kind of a living when I got down there. And um, at that time, pine marten were very lucrative to sell, so I got a lot of pine marten. But my main objective was to explore the country, and it was amazing. So after we went up one of these trips, they usually last about 2 or 3 weeks from the cabin. I'd pack enough supplies to last me 2 or 3 weeks. And it was a cold, cold trip. And snow was deep. Holy smokes, it was deep. There's nothing more difficult than traveling in the mountains in deep snow. It's extremely, extremely hard work. In fact, right now that I'm thinking about it, I want to mention that I'm training to travel into the mountains this coming winter. And it takes a lot of training. Um, I do a lot of cycling, so that helps keep me in shape and gets me in shape. I just come back from a bicycle ride, 2 hour ride, climbing hills as fast as I can, pushing as far as I can and as hard as I can because I know what's coming. Mountain travel is not a piece of cake. There's nothing easier as far as traveling in the winter. Dog sled is on the sea ice. Polar travel. Polar travel with a dog team or any kind of polar travel is nothing. I mean, nothing compared to traveling inland or in the mountains. There's nothing like the mountains. Sometimes when traveling in the mountains, I'll work all day long. I'm in huff and puff and pushing a sled, pulling a sled, helping the dogs out, breaking trail, finally make camp, and I look back behind us through the binoculars, and I can see my old camp that I just left that day. We might make 5 miles. 5 miles of just nothing but hardcore work. People ask me, why the heck do you do this stuff? I don't know. I tell you what, though, the good Lord has given me, good Lord has given me what it takes to do this. Give me a good set of lungs, legs, and heart. And, God gives everyone a talent of some type, and we're all different. And the reason we have different talents is so we can help one another. If we all had the same talent, we're all artists or athletes or whatever. I mean, what a boring life, and we wouldn't need each other to help one another. So all of our talents matter, and we can't take credit for our talents either. I mean, they're given to us by God. We're born with them, and so it's just not right to take credit for them. Basically, the way I look at it is I'm borrowing the talent, whatever strength I have, because someday it'll go away. And so I'll try to take care of it as much as I can, go as long as I can. And I'm just thankful, good Lord's allowed me to keep moving ahead. This year, like I said, I'll be going into the mountains. It's a young man's game to be traveling in the mountain, but what can you do? You gotta keep going. People always ask me, when are you going to retire? And I always tell them, well, I want to go for another 40 years and I'll start thinking about it. I don't know when I'm going to retire. Goodness sakes, only God knows that. Well, here I go, get off track again. So let's get back up to Tahkin River with my faithful dog, Tahkin. One of the funny things about being with dogs and alone in the wilderness for months on end is I don't talk much. And poor little Tahkin, the only thing he learned from me was, stop and go commands and, sit. And he hardly learned his name. I just keep quiet. I mean, you're in a quiet wilderness, and who are you going to talk to anyhow? Now, if you start talking when you're in the wilderness and someone talks back at you, then you might have problems. So it's just a silent, peaceful atmosphere, and there's no sense of rattling off to a dog who can't speak to you anyhow. Besides, when you talk to a dog like that, he just cocks his head, and you never know what he's thinking. He's thinking, you're nuts, probably. So let's get back up the river. I get off subject here, but so we're snowshoeing up, and it's cold, and I cross the river way up by the glacier, and the river was frozen solid, and I started traveling down down Tahkin River on the other side, the opposite side where my cabin is. And so we travel another week. I mean, it's a long trip, and I'm about out of supplies, but I know I'm close to the cabin, so it's just a matter of crossing the river to the cabin. And that's about 3 days away. And a Chinook come in. A Chinook is a southern wind, and when they come in, I mean, especially in southeast Alaska, they don't mess around. They turn they go from 20 below to 40 above in one night, and that's what it did. Holy smokes, the trees, and the first time I ever saw it blow there, the trees were just, making that brushy, hissy noise, and holy smokes, and it got really warm. Everything got wet. Sleeping bag was wet. It was miserable. miserable. So we kept on trucking along, try to, double my pace, speeding up, trying to get to that cabin. So I wanted to get a place in that cabin and get dried off, dry my gear. And the snow was getting wet. It just miserable, just miserable. Finally got down to where the cabin was, and all I had to do was cross the river. And I couldn't believe it. We got to the river. I could hear the river a long ways off. And I said, "Oh, what is that sound? The river's frozen. It sounded like open water, just crashing. Ice breaking." Got to the river, and the river was flowing. And it was flowing high, and it was flowing fast, with big ice chunks coming down the river. And I could see the cabin across the river. And I look at my pack, I'm out of supplies. I timed it to where I would just get to the cabin with hardly any supplies. And there's no way I could travel all the way back up the river and cross the river at the glacier and come back down. I'd starve. Sure, I had my rifle. I suppose I could have shot some game, made it. But I wanted to get that cabin. We were right there. I was looking at it. And all I had to do was cross the river. And it's easier said than done. So I said, well, this time I'm going to be a little bit smart. I'm taking all my dry matches, and I had them in a Ziploc bag, plastic bag, and I put them underneath my stocking cap. I says, all right, Tahkin, we're going to go for a swim. I'm going to drop the pack, everything here, and we're going to rush across this river, and we're going to run to that cabin. Easy peasy, no problem. Sure, it might be cold at first, but we're not going to be in the water anymore in a minute. Not that wide, and it's only maybe waist deep. And so, but it was flowing fast. Holy smokes, it was flowing fast. And big chunks were coming down. And I didn't care. I wanted to get that cabin. I was thinking about that wood stove, get warmed up, having a nice big steak, bear steak, and that's all I was thinking about. So I timed it. I took out my pack, and I timed it to where there wasn't any ice in the river flowing down. I didn't want to get hit with a chunk of ice. And so, sure enough, I jumped in, and I heard a snap, and a big chunk of ice broke off the side of the river, but it was too late. I was in the middle of the river, almost to the edge, almost to the far edge. And that piece of ice, about the size of a table, slammed into me. And I tried to push it away, but then it turned upright. And it was like I don't know, it's like holding a piece of plywood in a 60-mile-an-hour wind. I mean, you just can't do it. It's going to push you away. And it did. It pushed me down river. And my head didn't go under, but I was going down with that ice. Oh, it was cold. Oh my gosh, it was cold. I went up to my neck. I fought and scratched trying to get around the ice, and finally got my hands on the shoreline, a bunch of brush there, and I just hung on. And of course, next to shore, the deepest spot, it was over my head, and Tahkin's on the shore. I swear he was laughing. He was just up there rolling around the snow, getting dried off, and just wagging his tail. And this is one time I think that he was really, really speaking to me, because I bet he was just laughing his butt off watching me drown in a freezing cold river. But he knew I'd get out. And I did. I crawled out of there, but boy, I was cold. I stayed in there too long, way too long. And I knew I was freezing. I mean, I was going to hypothermia, and I was in trouble. And I knew it. I've been around cold water for a while, and I knew that you can't last very long in freezing cold water like that. So I ran up to the cabin as fast as I could, pushed open the door. Luckily, there wasn't any bears inside the block my way. If the bear was inside to block me, I just throw him out. My adrenaline was high. It was running high because I knew I had to get heat and I had to get heat fast. So I flipped, my wood stove was all set up, had the kindling sets or birch bark, and I did have some dry matches sitting on the stove as well. And plus I still had the dry matches underneath my stocking cap. And I went to grab those box of matches, and by then my fingers weren't working. I couldn't even open a doggone match container. They weren't working. And what? I finally ripped it off with my teeth, got a match out, spit it on the floor, and I couldn't pick it up. So finally, I managed to get one of those wooden matches between my two knuckles to hold it tight enough to strike it against the stove and start a match. And of course, then I put the birch bark in, and then the twigs and the kindling. And before I know it, that stove was just cherry red hot. And I was shivering. Oh my gosh. It was a dangerous situation. You go into hypothermia. Well, the first thing happens is you kind of lose your senses. You forget where you are and what you're doing. And luckily, I got that fire going. And all the while, I think Tahkin was just smiling. And, you had to see the scene because here you got a big old furry dog, with a double coat, and that water didn't bother him a bit. He probably had fun swimming across that river. And him watching me thrash around, he probably thought it was funny. Alaskan Malamutes have a twisted sense of humor. They really do. Some of you out there have Malamutes, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, anyhow, I got the fire going and warmed up. Got some bear steaks cooking. Grabbed a tallow, warmed that up, put on my bear steaks, and thought about everything. And it could have been worse. Could have been worse. But I thank God it wasn't. And if it was worse, I wouldn't be here to tell you a story. But this is just one of hundreds and hundreds of stories I have to tell you. So hang in there and please subscribe. And I will be back to tell you more. God bless.